2012 was a huge year in pop culture. In film, The Dark Knight Rises hit theaters. In music, Flo Rida was topping the charts with songs like Wild Ones, Good Feeling, and Whistle. Meanwhile, though, in WWE, it was all about the conflict between the old and the new, as well some newer stars were trying to establish themselves as the face of the new generation. A few older names from the past were making their return and staking their claim to still being top star of the promotion. But how did it all happen? Well, join us today as we take a deep dive into the entire story from start to finish in WWE in 2012, a year in review. When we last left off, things were looking brighter than they had been in years for WWE. Sure, the Summer of Punk hadn't gone perfectly, but come the end of 2011, the voice of the voiceless was WWE Champion. And on top of that, the rest of the gold in the company was being held by Daniel Bryan, Cody Rhodes, Zack Ryder, Beth Phoenix, Evan Bourne, and Kofi Kingston, with this being what gave us that now famous picture, all of them together with their belts. Not that this situation will last for long though, because on the January 16th episode of Raw, Ryder lost his United States title to Jack Swagger. And that would lead us into the first big pay-per-view of the year, the Royal Rumble on January 29th, where the new champ would enter the Rumble itself and attempt to book himself a spot in the main event of WrestleMania. Before we'd get there though, the undercard saw Daniel Bryan survive a triple threat steel cage match against Mark Henry and The Big Show to retain his World Heavyweight title, CM Punk defend the WWE title against Dolph Ziggler, and John Cena and Kane go at it after the Big Red Machine had spent the weeks prior trying to get Big Match John to embrace the hate and turn heel. Of course, despite helping to bury his friend Zack Ryder when he stole his girlfriend, Cena didn't turn full heel in the end, but that didn't mean he won this one either, because once it was all said and done, it would go to a double countout. Still, at least the Rumble would end more definitively, as there, following Kofi Kingston giving us the first iteration of his soon-to-be annual save spot, Chris Jericho surprised everyone by making his return as the number 29 entrant. And after dominating the bout during its final minutes, he'd come perilously close to winning, only for him to slip on a banana peel at the end and be eliminated by Sheamus. So, with the Irishman now booking himself a title shot at the Showcase of the Immortals, the only question left was, who would he choose? And luckily for him, his choice was made easy by the fact that the very man he was meant to wrestle on the main show the year prior now held the World Heavyweight title. But before WrestleMania came, there'd be another pit stop on the road towards it, and this took place on February 19th when WWE held Elimination Chamber in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. What was the big story going into this one? Well, that would be Kane's continued attempts to get in the head of John Cena and have him turn heel. So after failing to achieve this the prior month, here, the Big Red Machine faced off against the West Newbury native in an ambulance match, all in the hopes that it would draw out his darker side. But John couldn't turn heel now. No, he had a showdown with The Rock the following month to worry about. So after getting the better of his opponent and ending their feud, the franchise player set his sights on preparing for the Great One. And that wasn't the only WrestleMania program which was finalized on this show either, because after defending their WWE and World Heavyweight titles in separate Elimination Chamber matches, CM Punk and Daniel Bryan both accepted the challenges of Chris Jericho and Sheamus respectively. That said, before these bouts would come, there was still one more thing to deal with, as on March 31st, the new Hall of Fame class was inducted, with this class featuring nothing but notable figures such as Yokozuna, Ron Simmons, Mil Mascaras, the Four Horsemen, Mike Tyson, and Edge. Then, once the rings were all handed out and everyone had a chance to celebrate, it was finally time for the biggest show of the year, as the very next night, WrestleMania 28 took place to an all-time pay-per-view buy rate for the company. And why was it so big? Well, because after a year of teasing, this was finally going to be the return of The Rock to singles action. But prior to this, the undercard would also feature some memorable moments too, as The Big Show won the Intercontinental title from Cody Rhodes, Raw and SmackDown general managers John Laurinaitis and Teddy Long used teams of surrogates to go at it in a 12-man tag, and CM Punk successfully defended the WWE title after tapping out Chris Jericho. Of course, all of these matches paled in comparison to the end of an era bout between The Undertaker and Triple H though, as there, inside Hell in a Cell, the two went at it one more time, this time with Shawn Michaels acting as the special guest referee. So with this closing out a 4-year-long mini-story and representing the toughest challenge the Dead Man had faced yet, it was all on the line for the streak. And at one point, after getting hit by a Sweet Chin Music pedigree combo, everyone, both in the arena and watching at TV, bit on one of the greatest ever near falls, as for a moment, it looked like it was finally over. In the end though, it was The Undertaker who came out the victor to take his record to 20-0. and as all three men embraced each other on the stage afterwards, it felt to many like the moment the Phenom could have called it a day and hung up his boots, because it was hard to imagine him ever topping this. Needless to say then, that left a tall task for the main event, as after a year of build, John Cena and The Rock finally went one-on-one in what was being billed as once in a lifetime, and the formal passing of the torch from the prior generation to the next. So that's why it came as such a surprise then when, once it was over, it was the Great One who was standing tall as the winner. Yes, it seemed the torch wasn't going to be passed quite yet, and as a result of this, Big Match John spent the rest of the year kayfabe spiraling as he tried to recover from such a defeat. But of course that wasn't the only big moment which had huge lingering effects following WrestleMania, because, rewinding back to the opener for a second, after having been cheated out of the bout the prior year, fans were left upset when Daniel Bryan lost the World Heavyweight title to Sheamus in just 18 seconds after the American Dragon's on-screen girlfriend AJ Lee distracted him with a kiss. And this meant that the next night on Raw, in protest of the booking decision, the live crowd drowned out most of the show with a tsunami of yes chants. That said, one thing which did get them back into things was John Cena coming out at the close of the show, and, before he was able to challenge The Rock to a rematch, being interrupted by a returning Brock Lesnar. That's right, after conquering the world of MMA, Lesnar had come back. And now, with him having an aura unlike any other as a legit UFC World Champion, the story felt simple. Have him run through everyone for a long time until eventually someone was able to beat him. Apparently no one told this to Vince McMahon though, because at the next pay-per-view of the year, Extreme Rules on April 29th, Lesnar and Cena would go one-on-one in an excellent Extreme Rules bout, which was only marred by the decision to have Big Match John come out the winner in the end. Yes, in one fell swoop, this had killed much of Brock's aura, and also undermined the story of Cena having his worst year ever. Still, at least the rest of the show was better, as elsewhere, Cody Rhodes regained the Intercontinental title from the Big Show in a tables match, Ryback's rise started to gain steam with a handicap win over jobber duo Aaron Relic and Jay Hatton, and CM Punk successfully defended the WWE title during his Chicago street fight against Chris Jericho. But none of this mattered to Brock Lesnar, of course. So still angered at how things had gone for him in the main event, the next night on Raw, he'd kayfabe break the arm of on-screen COO Triple H and get himself suspended as a result. And with the game being gone for a while now too, it left John Laurinaitis as the only on-screen authority figure left over on the Red brand. So perhaps it should come as no surprise then at this point he began setting his sights on John Cena, a decision which led to the two facing off at the next pay-per-view of the year on May 20th, Over the Limit. Of course, this was one of the most maligned pay-per-view main events in WWE history. And to make matters worse, after it was all over, Johnny Ace was the one picking up the victory. Maybe WWE would have been better served focusing his attentions on his world champion instead then, because prior to that on the card, CM Punk was having another stellar title defense, this time against his former Ring of Honor cohort, Daniel Bryan. That's right, despite still being a heel, the Yes Movement was starting to pick up so much steam that Bryan was given the #1 contendership spot here. And while he didn't win, the bout the two put on was fantastic, with fans cheering it on. So, seeing the success of this with the live crowd, WWE decided to book the rematch the following month at June 17th's No Way Out. This said, this time a third party would be added to things so as to throw a spanner into the works, as Kane made it a triple threat match. And when this one was over, it would be Punk who continued to stand tall. It's just a shame he was still being overshadowed by John Cena then, because in the main event, with a returning Vince McMahon in his corner, he'd take on John Laurinaitis and his hand-picked surrogate, The Big Show. But it wasn't a normal match because, as a result of a stipulation set by the boss himself, if Big Show failed to win, then Johnny Ace would be removed from his on-screen position of authority. So thankfully, Big Match John came out the winner here and put a merciful end to the era of People Power. And with that reign of terror now over, it was on to the next big show of the year, the Great American Bash on July 3rd. Though, in a twist on their usual strategy, the company chose not to air this one as a standalone pay-per-view, but instead, a special episode of SmackDown. Why was this? Well, with the Blue Brand's TV ratings not doing well, it was hoped that such a decision would give them a much-needed boost. But while it did feature some notable moments, such as Ryback continuing his Goldberg-esque rise with a victory over Curt Hawkins, and Zack Ryder winning a 20-man battle royal, in the end, it didn't really have any lasting effects. At least Money in the Bank on July 15th would feel like a much bigger deal though, because there, not only would Sheamus and Alberto Del Rio go to war over the World Heavyweight title, but Dolph Ziggler would earn a shot at this very belt at any time of his choosing by outlasting Christian, Cody Rhodes, Damian Sandow, Santino Marella, Lord Tensai, Sin Cara, and Tyson Kidd in the first Money in the Bank ladder match of the night. Then, once that was done, Ryback's winning streak continued, and John Cena earned a WWE title shot by beating Chris Jericho, The Big Show, Kane, and The Miz in the second Money in the Bank ladder match of the night. But that was all table setting for the real highlight of the night, as going at it one more time, CM Punk and Daniel Bryan had another banger over the WWE title. And to make matters even more interesting, with AJ Lee now growing tired of her on-screen boyfriend's abusive ways, she'd play the special guest referee here. That said, while she didn't choose to screw the American Dragon over here, it wasn't enough to get him the win, as once it was all said and done, the Second City Saints' lengthy reign continued. And with this run going on for so long now, it meant changes would have to be made in order to freshen things up. So that was why, at the special 3-hour edition of Raw 1000 on July 23rd, Punk turned heel when he laid out The Rock with a GTS. Of course, the reason he'd done so was that only moments prior, the Great One had announced he'd be returning at the Royal Rumble to face whoever the champion was then. And that wasn't the only notable moment to come out of this show either, because after AJ Lee left Daniel Bryan at the altar during their wedding, then was announced as the new general manager of Raw going forward, John Cena cashed in his Money in the Bank contract on CM Punk, as the two had a 5-star classic, during which the champ pulled out a very rarely seen in 2012 pile driver. Even after taking this though, Big Match John appeared to have the bout won at one point. That was until the Big Show got involved and caused the challenger to get disqualified, with this marking the first time anyone had ever failed during a Money in the Bank cash-in attempt. So, looking for revenge, Cena would get his hands on the Big Show at SummerSlam on August 19th a few weeks later. And in doing so, he'd also get another shot at the WWE title, because it would be Show vs. Cena vs. CM Punk in the second to main event. Before that happened, however, the now rebranded NXT would crown its first ever world champion on July 16th when Seth Rollins defeated Jinder Mahal in the finals of a tournament. And once that was over, it was on to the biggest show of the summer, as there, despite successfully defending his belt against the top star in the company, the voice of the voiceless still couldn't get a chance to go on last on pay-per-view. No, that spot would instead be saved for returning Brock Lesnar, as here he sought to settle his beef with Triple H. And thankfully by now, Paul Heyman had returned to WWE too to act as Brock's advocate. So with him in his corner offering advice, Lesnar was able to tap out the game after 18 minutes and 45 seconds, seemingly putting an end to the COO's in-ring career in the process. Elsewhere though, things would work out much better for Sheamus as he successfully defended the World Heavyweight title against Alberto Del Rio. And prior to this, after an attempt to make a match with Charlie Sheen fell through, Daniel Bryan would begin his odd couple alliance with Kane after the two went one-on-one and settled their beef. Of course, had other plans came to pass though, a separate big match would have taken place on this night, as after starting an online feud in the weeks prior, Dean Ambrose was meant to make his debut by facing Mick Foley. Once it became clear that Foley was not going to be able to wrestle though, the whole thing was scrapped. And sure, we would see more of Ambrose before the year was over, but before we get there, September 16th's Night of Champions saw CM Punk go one-on-one with John Cena again. But despite it feeling like it was finally Cena's night here, the match between the two ended in a double pinfall. And that pleased both Punk and his new manager Paul Heyman, as it meant he'd keep the belt around his waist for another month. And he wasn't the only champion who was retaining here, because in the opener, The Miz kept the Intercontinental title around his waist by beating Cody Rhodes, Rey Mysterio, and Sin Cara in a fatal 4-way match. Then, once that was done, Kofi Kingston and R-Truth successfully defended their tag team titles when they got the better of Daniel Bryan and Kane, the newly formed Team Hell No. And as if that weren't enough, following on from this, Antonio Cesaro got the better of Zack Ryder so as to make sure he left the event still the United States champion. Unfortunately for Divas champion Layla though, things wouldn't go as well for her, as she'd end up losing her gold to Eve Torres in a match which lasted just over 7 minutes. And this meant that Torres entered the next pay-per-view of the year, October 28th Hell in a Cell, as the reigning, defending, top dog in the women's division. That said, given how little importance was placed on this division at this time, her triple threat bout against Layla and Caitlyn drew little interest. No, what fans were far more interested in was the main event, where inside of the cell, following a minor injury picked up by John Cena, Ryback would step in his place as #1 contender to CM Punk's WWE title. Before we get there though, new tag team champions Team Hell No lost their belts to Cody Rhodes and Damien Sandow. Then, once that was over, the Big Show beat Sheamus to become World Heavyweight Champion. Luckily though, IC and US champions Kofi Kingston and Antonio Cesaro would have a much better time of things when they successfully defended their belts against The Miz and Justin Gabriel respectively. And finally, following on from there, the main event saw Streak versus Title as Punk and Ryback finally met one-on-one. Of course, for as over as the challenger was getting here though, even he wasn't good enough to dethrone the Second City Saint, and so it was that after referee Brad Maddox revealed himself to be in league with the champ, he'd execute a fast count in order to let Punk sneak away with the win. But that wouldn't be the end of the feud yet, because heading into November 18th Survivor Series, the big man got his rematch when it was booked to be him versus Punk versus John Cena in a triple threat bout in the main event. That said, even here, with all the odds against him, the champ was still able to come out with the belt around his waist. Of course, in order to do so though, he'd have to get a little help from the newest main roster faction. Yes, this was the debut of The Shield, as, towards the end of the match, Dean Ambrose, Seth Rollins, and Roman Reigns came out of the crowd and triple powerbombed Ryback through the announce table. And while it was unclear what their allegiance, if any, were to Punk, the Second City Saint absolutely took advantage of the moment to score a pinfall over a distracted John Cena. But it wasn't only The Shield's debut which made this night special, because elsewhere, the rest of the card saw Eve Torres successfully defend the Divas title against Caitlyn, Antonio Cesaro get the better of R-Truth during their US title match, and a traditional 5-on-5 Survivor Series elimination bout see Dolph Ziggler, Alberto Del Rio, Wade Barrett, Damien Sandow, and David Otunga defeat Kane, Kofi Kingston, Randy Orton, The Miz, and by now firm fan favorite Daniel Bryan. Still though, for as great as some of these matches were, it was really The Shield everyone wanted to talk about the next night on Raw. So, luckily, they'd make their presence felt when they came down to the ring through the crowd, decked out in riot gear, to announce that from there on in, they were going to be the judge, jury, and executioners of WWE, and that if anyone was deemed to be guilty under their rule, they'd be swiftly taken out by the hounds of justice. Of course, with all three now being main roster exclusives though, it meant Rollins would be forced to drop his NXT World title to Big E Langston on a show that, while it was filmed on December 6th, wouldn't actually air until January of the next year. Then, just 10 days after that, following another Tribute to the Troops show, WWE put on their final pay-per-view of the year, TLC, Tables, Ladders, and Chairs, where for the first time, The Shield hit the ring as a trio. Before this occurred though, Antonio Cesaro and Kofi Kingston would retain their United States and Intercontinental Championships respectively, and the Big Show got the better of Sheamus with the help of a giant steel chair in their bout over the World Heavyweight title. Then, following on from that, the feud which started when Dolph Ziggler accused John Cena of having a fling with AJ Lee hit the ring when Big Match John and the Show-Off went at it in a ladder match over the Money in the Bank contract. Of course, what the challenger didn't expect here was that, come the end of the bout, AJ would turn heel and align herself with Dolph when she pushed Cena off the ladder right into a waiting super kick from his opponent, costing him the match in the process. But while that may have technically been the main event of the night, the real one everyone wanted to see was The Shield versus Team Hell No and Ryback. So thankfully, this didn't disappoint then, because over the course of almost 23 minutes, all 6 men put on a clinic, with the Hounds of Justice proving to be too strong of a unit by the end as they began their lengthy winning streak. And with that big win, it marked the end of the year for WWE, a year where, despite starting off a little shaky, things really got going come the end of things with the firm establishment of CM Punk as a top guy, the continued rise of Daniel Bryan, and the introduction of The Shield. So perhaps it should come as no surprise that as 2013 came around, all 3 of these acts would be the focus of the show in different ways. That said, for as big of a year as it would be for both Punk and the Hounds of Justice, arguably the most memorable thing would be that this was the point where the Yes Movement reached another level altogether.